I ordered the most expensive drink on the menu just to see his expression change. He didn't budge. He paid for everything without blinking, looked me in the eyes, and said the words that tore down, in seconds, the wall I had spent years building. But what I didn't know was that, while I thought I was testing him, I was the one being unraveled, layer by layer, until there was nothing left to hide. But before I go on, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and let me know in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love knowing how far our stories are reaching. I'm 38 years old, I own a chain of medical spas bringing in almost $2 million a month, and that Friday night I was sitting alone at a restaurant table with a glass of wine that cost more than a lot of people's paychecks, waiting for a guy I had already decided to reject before he even showed up. It wasn't cruelty. It was protection. I learned the hardest way possible that no man approaches a woman like me by accident. My ex-husband spent 4 years telling me he loved me while putting his name as a partner on 2 of my companies. When we divorced, he took a chunk of what I had built with my own bare hands. My ex-boyfriend, the one who came after, was more subtle. He never asked for anything directly. He just showed up for the milestones, the photos, the upscale events. He mysteriously ghosted me the week I closed one of the clinics for renovations and our revenue dipped. Just a coincidence, of course. So yes, I tested them. Consciously, methodically, and without a drop of guilt. The method was simple. I would pick the fanciest restaurant I could find, arrive early, leave my luxury watch very visible on the table, order the most outrageous things on the menu, and watch. I'd watch for the furrowed brow, the eyes darting to the prices, the excuse invented on the spot, the performative effort of someone trying to look like they aren't uncomfortable when they clearly are. In 8 blind dates over the last 2 years, no one made it past this first phase without giving themselves away somehow. My friend Sarah was the one who set this one up. She called me all excited, saying he was different, that he was a simple guy but had a dignity she rarely saw. A biomedical equipment technician. 34 years old. His name was Caleb. I listened to it all without saying much. Simple, in my internal dictionary, meant he didn't have money. And not having money meant he was just another one coming after mine. I got to the restaurant 10 minutes early. I ordered a sparkling water and arranged my things on the table with that calculated precision I had perfected, designer bag resting on the chair next to me, car keys right in plain sight, the posture of someone who isn't expecting anything special because she's already seen it all. Caleb arrived exactly on time. A simple button-down shirt, dark slacks, clean shoes but clearly from a standard department store. His hair was combed with that subtle effort of a guy who got dressed up without wanting to look like he tried too hard. He stopped at the entrance, locked eyes with me, and walked straight in my direction without that typical hesitation of a guy weighing if it's really worth approaching. He shook my hand firmly, sat down, and said thank you without overdoing it. He didn't make any cheap comments about my appearance. He didn't look at the bag or the keys. Or he faked it really well, which at the time seemed suspicious to me. When the menu arrived, I didn't wait long. I ordered a tasting menu described as an exclusive culinary experience that I knew cost over $300 a person. I didn't ask if he was okay with it. I just announced that's what I wanted, looked at him, and waited. Caleb looked at the menu for a few seconds. Then he closed it, set it on the edge of the table, and said, in an absolutely calm voice, "Sounds good." Just that. He didn't blink. He didn't give that forced smile of someone swallowing dryly on the inside. He made 0 comments about the price or my choice. He just accepted it the way someone accepts a proposal to walk in one direction instead of another. That threw me off more than I expected. Dinner was a long affair. He spoke thoughtfully, not timidly. He asked me things about my work with a curiosity that felt genuine, completely lacking that glint of financial interest I had learned to spot. When I described the clinics, he didn't ask what my profit margins were. He asked what I liked doing on a day-to-day basis, which part of the job I found the most difficult. Things nobody ever asked me. I answered carefully, still observing. When the check came, the total was pushing $700. I saw the number printed on the receipt when the waiter discreetly dropped it off. Caleb took it, looked at it, pulled his card out of his wallet, and handed it over without a word. But I was paying attention. His hand was slightly stiff. Not much. Just an almost imperceptible spasm in his fingers as he held the card before letting it go. He felt the weight of it. He knew exactly what he was paying for. And he paid it anyway. After the waiter walked away with the card, Caleb leaned back slightly in his chair, looked at me with an expression I couldn't immediately categorize, and said in a low voice, without any aggression, without any sarcasm, "I hope the food was worth whatever you were trying to find out." My stomach dropped. Because he knew. He knew the whole time. And he paid anyway, without calling me out in the moment, without making a scene. He waited until it was over to say it, looking me dead in the eye, man to man, like someone politely but firmly returning something that doesn't belong to them. I didn't know what to say. He stood up, thanked me for the company with no apparent irony, wished me a good night, and walked out. I sat alone at that ridiculously expensive table, my wine glass still half full, feeling for the first time in years that the test had failed. Not him. Me. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept replaying his words in my head with that infuriating feeling of being put in checkmate in total silence, unable to argue back. I hope the food was worth whatever you were trying to find out. Direct. No resentment. No melodrama, which is what I expected from someone who had just dropped 2 months of disposable income on a dinner he didn't even ask for. In the morning, I woke up early, went to my first meeting of the day, signed 3 vendor contracts, and approved the remodeling of a new clinic in Tribeca. Everything looked normal on the surface. Inside, that sentence just kept spinning. Sarah called me around noon. She asked how it went. I told her it was fine. She went quiet for a second, the specific silence of someone who knows exactly what fine means coming from me, and then asked if I had actually given him a chance or if I had shown up already deciding it wouldn't work out. I didn't answer right away. She kept going, with that breezy tone of hers that sometimes hurts more than a direct confrontation. Lauren, you know he just took out a loan recently, right? To pay for his mom's surgery. He's still making the monthly payments. I felt something shift in my chest. A very specific, targeted kind of guilt. Because that man had walked into a $700 dinner carrying a debt I didn't even know existed. And I had sat across the table from him knowing exactly what I was doing, with my watch flashing and my bag on the chair, managing the date like I was managing an IRS audit. I hung up with Sarah and stared out my office window. Down below, New York City was moving at its usual rhythm. Cabs, crowds, the hustle. I had spent the last 2 years convincing myself that those tests were necessary. That any woman in my tax bracket would be crazy not to do the same. That I had the right to protect myself after everything I had been through. And I did. I had the right. But in that moment, staring blankly at the street, I started thinking about something I had never asked myself directly. Protect myself from what, exactly? From getting my heart broken again? Or from needing to trust someone again? Because there's a difference. One is survival instinct. The other is fear disguised as strategy. I picked up my phone and stared at the contact card Sarah had sent me before the date. Caleb Hayes. His profile picture was a bookshelf. Not even his face. I stared at it for way longer than I should have. I typed, deleted, typed again. In the end, I sent the simplest thing I could. I was awful to you yesterday, in a way you didn't deserve. I'm sorry. Read at. It sat there unanswered for 40 minutes. 40 minutes where I shoved my phone in a drawer, tried to work, opened the drawer twice, and slammed it shut again. When he finally replied, it was short, no need to apologize. We all protect ourselves the best way we know how. I read that 3 times. It wasn't performative forgiveness. It wasn't an open door for drama. It was just an honest observation, delivered without a penalty. He saw me, called out what I was doing, and didn't use it as a weapon against me. I texted back asking if he'd be open to grabbing coffee. Not at a 5-star restaurant. A simple place, his choice. He took a little longer to reply this time. When he did, he named a small diner over in the West Village, early Saturday morning. I accepted without negotiating. Friday night, I laid out my clothes. I stood in front of my closet for a ridiculous amount of time. I had power suits, I had elegantly tailored dresses, I had everything I usually wore to project that image I thought kept me safe. I grabbed a pair of jeans, a white t-shirt, and sneakers. Simple. No watch. No designer bag. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself at first, not because of the clothes, but because of my expression. I looked like a version of me I hadn't seen in a long time. Younger, maybe. Or just more honest. I got to the diner before him. I sat at a small booth near the window. I ordered a black coffee and waited, but this time it wasn't a strategic wait. It was just waiting. With a slight knot in my stomach that I couldn't pretend wasn't there. Caleb walked in right on time. When he spotted me, a flicker of surprise crossed his face. Subtle, but I caught it. He was probably expecting the dinner version of me. He sat down, ordered a coffee too, and we sat in silence for a moment. I broke the ice. I told him I wanted to shoot straight, that what I did was a test I'd been running on everyone for 2 years, and that he was the only one who ever called it out. I told him it caught me off guard in a way I was still trying to process. He listened without interrupting. Then he sat quietly for a few seconds, like someone gathering his thoughts, and said that he had figured it out the second I ordered that tasting menu. That it wasn't hard to read the room. But he chose to pay for it and sit through the whole thing not to impress me, but because he had given his word he'd show up, and he wasn't going to break his word over a menu. I took that in. Break his word over a menu. It wasn't about me. It was about his commitment to his own integrity. I sat there with my coffee getting cold, realizing I had spent 2 years building a highly sophisticated radar to detect character, and this man had just demonstrated his in a way my entire system didn't know how to compute. Over the next few days, I tried to get back to the grind. Meetings, quotas, expansion plans. I had an investment pitch sitting on my desk that could double our clinic locations in 18 months. It was the kind of thing I would have signed without a second thought 2 months ago. I stared at that proposal for 3 days without touching it. It wasn't business hesitation. It was something else. A question that started small and kept growing. What for? Not in a nihilistic way, but genuinely. Why another clinic? Why a bigger number on the annual report? What was I trying to prove, and to who? I set up another hangout with Caleb. Not a date, exactly, just to talk. We had started texting, short, but frequent. He would send me quotes from books he was reading. I'd reply with something about work and immediately regret sounding like a corporate robot. We met up at a park near the hospital where he worked. He was on his lunch break, still wearing his badge and scrubs. We sat on a bench. He told me about a machine he had fixed that morning, an MRI scanner that had a minor glitch but could have compromised the diagnoses of dozens of patients. He talked about it with an intensity that surprised me. It wasn't fake corporate enthusiasm. It was the vibe of someone who finds actual meaning in what they do, regardless of the paycheck. I asked him if he had ever thought about switching fields, making more money. He thought before he answered, a habit of his I was starting to notice and really respect. He said yes, especially when his mom got sick. He thought that if he had more money, he could have gotten her better, more comfortable care. But he didn't want to lose himself in the process. He said he'd rather find side gigs to supplement his income than abandon work that felt meaningful to him. I sat there quietly, just taking that in. Because I had done the exact opposite for years. I completely lost myself in the process. I started with one small clinic because I genuinely believed in the work. Now I was managing 12 locations and could barely remember the last time I actually stepped into a treatment room, talked to a real patient, and felt like my job mattered beyond the monthly P&L. I went back to my office that afternoon and sat in my chair without opening my laptop for 20 minutes. My managing partner, Rachel, knocked on the door and asked if I was okay. I said I was. She's known me for 6 years and didn't believe me for a second, but she didn't push it. The following week, I passed on the investment proposal. The partner who pitched it was stunned. He called me 3 times. Emailed me. Begged to meet in person. In the boardroom, he tried to sway me with analytics, projections, competitor benchmarks. It was all solid, it was all entirely rational. And I still said no. When I walked out of that room, I felt a weird sense of calm. Not exactly relief at first. More like the quiet after making a choice you know is going to cost you, but you know is right anyway. I texted Caleb, I turned down an expansion deal today. He texted back a few minutes later, how did it feel? Not, why? Not, are you sure? Just how did I feel? I replied, terrified and lighter, all at once. He took a minute, then wrote, that's usually how it feels when the choice is actually yours. I stared at that text for a really long time. My mom called me that night. She had heard through the grapevine, meaning Sarah, that I was seeing someone, and my mom is the type who would rather call at the worst time than not call at all. She demanded to know who he was, what he did, where he lived. When I told her he was a hospital technician, I heard her specific brand of silence. It's not empty, it's the sound of her brain rapidly processing anxiety. She didn't say anything out of line. She just asked if I had thought this through. If I remembered what I went through before. If I was being careful. I said yes to everything, patiently, but inside I was thinking something I couldn't say out loud to her, that the problem was never a lack of caution. The problem was that I was too careful, but with all the wrong tools. Caleb's mom's name was Martha, and I found out her health was taking a turn when he mentioned, in passing, that he had clocked out early to take her to a follow-up appointment. He said it with the total casualness of a son who organizes his entire life around his mother's needs without ever seeing it as a sacrifice. That hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. My ex-husband had never left anything early for me. It was always me bending, me compromising, me treating the relationship as a priority while he treated it as a convenience. With Caleb, it was different. Not because he made grand gestures, but because his small actions revealed a character I wasn't used to seeing up close. On a Wednesday night, he texted me saying his mom had taken a turn for the worse. He didn't ask for anything. He just let me know, probably because we were in the habit of sharing our days. I didn't overthink it. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the hospital. When I got there, he was in the waiting room hallway, hunched over in one of those plastic chairs no hospital has ever managed to make comfortable. His elbows were on his knees, his head hanging low. When he looked up and saw me, the shock on his face confirmed he never expected me to show up. I sat down next to him without saying much. Sometimes just being there is more honest than anything you can say, and I was learning that. The doctor came out a while later and said Martha was stable, but they needed to keep her overnight for observation. Caleb thanked him, walked into her room, and I followed, highly aware that I was stepping into a space I hadn't quite earned yet. Martha was lying in the bed, pale, but her eyes were open. When she saw me, she managed a weak smile. I hung back by the door while they talked. After a few minutes, she called me by my name, even though I had no idea how she knew it, and said it was nice to have company. I quietly slipped out into the hallway to give them privacy. I stood outside listening to his voice as he talked to her, gentle, patient, completely unhurried. And I thought about all the nights I had spent alone in a massive penthouse with a crystal chandelier, convinced that security meant having it all, and how, standing in that hospital corridor smelling of bleach and rubbing alcohol, I felt closer to something real than I had in years. First thing in the morning, without telling him, I called my assistant and had her pull the outstanding balance for his mother's hospital stay. Once I got the number, I had her wire a deposit covering the entire thing, under his name. Later, when he came back from the billing desk staring daggers at me, I didn't look away. I told him I did it because I wanted to, not because he asked, and not because I thought he couldn't handle it himself. He stood in silence for a long time. When he finally spoke, he said it was hard for him to accept it without feeling like it threw something off balance between us. I told him I was the one who screwed up the balance from day one. I told him I had made him foot a $700 bill for a fake dinner while he was paying off his mother's surgery debt, and if there was a tab to settle, this was the priority. He didn't reply right away. But after a moment, he gave a slight nod, like a man accepting something that took a lot of effort to swallow. We spent the rest of the night at the hospital. At some point, he dozed off in the chair next to her bed, and I stayed awake just watching him. Not in some cheesy movie way. Just with the quiet realization of someone seeing a person for who they truly are for the very first time, and finally understanding what I was looking at. This was a man who loved through simple, consistent actions. Who didn't act like he cared, he actually cared. Who didn't talk about integrity, he just had it. And who, for whatever reason, had walked into my life right when I still had enough time left to learn from him. Martha was discharged 4 days later. Caleb went to pick her up and texted me a picture of them walking out of the hospital, her arm looped through his, both of them beaming. I didn't need any more proof of what this guy carried on his shoulders every single day without breaking a sweat. The weeks that followed were wonderful, in a strange sort of way. We started seeing each other more, but without that heavy, what are we, pressure that usually crushes new relationships. We went on walks, hit up low-key spots, and talked about things I hadn't had anyone to talk about with in years, actual doubts, real fears, genuine regrets. He told me about the years he tried chasing other careers, how he even enrolled in an IT program because he thought he was supposed to want more. He dropped out in the second semester, not because he wasn't smart enough, but because he realized he was trying to force himself to want a life that wasn't his. He went back to hospital maintenance with the crystal clear certainty of a guy who knows exactly where he belongs. I listened, comparing it to my own path, realizing mine was built on a completely different foundation, always wanting more, always needing to be bigger, always trying to outpace someone else. I never stopped to ask if it was actually what I wanted. I only asked if it was enough, and the answer always pushed me to just grind harder. One Saturday afternoon, we hit up a used book fair. He was a totally different person in that element, looser, more animated. He stopped at every single booth, handling the books with the reverence of someone who truly respects the written word. In the back, an old guy was selling vintage magazines and beat-up hardcovers. Caleb picked one up, flipped through it, put it back, picked up another. He ended up buying one for $5 and looked so genuinely thrilled about it that I just stared at him, not knowing what to do with the feeling swelling in my chest. As we were walking, I asked him if he ever regretted not picking a career that paid more. He chewed on that. He said it wasn't exactly regret, but sometimes he wondered if he could have given his mom an easier life if he had chosen differently. That was the only part that stung. The rest didn't. That night, I went home and sat in my home office. I stared at the corporate reports piled on my desk. 8 clinics still running at full capacity. Revenue stable. Great margins. Numbers that would have made me pop champagne 2 years ago. I asked myself if I was happy. I couldn't answer right away, because the question felt way heavier than I anticipated. The next day, I had an executive board meeting. I sat at the head of the table like always, ran the agenda like always, made executive calls like always. But something had shifted in how I looked at the whole machine. Not that I didn't care. Just a slight detachment, like I was watching myself from the outside, asking in real time what any of this actually mattered. After the meeting, I asked Rachel to pull the staff roster for one of our oldest clinics. I drove over there at the end of the day, walked the halls, and just talked to the team. Stuff I hadn't done in at least 2 years. I walked out of there feeling more whole than I ever did leaving a quarterly earnings meeting. I told Caleb about it that night. He said sometimes you have to go back to the beginning to remember why you started in the first place. That it's not a sign of weakness, it's calibration. Calibration. I like that word. I kept it. My mom called, demanding to meet him. I didn't invite her, she just unilaterally decided it was time. We set up a dinner at my place, casual, nothing too stiff. Caleb showed up with a fruit basket and an easy smile, and I watched my mom size him up with that surgical glare she's perfected over 70 years of life in dealing with people. She grilled him on his job, his income, his 5-year plan. He answered everything straight up, without puffing his chest or shrinking himself. When she asked if he really thought he could keep up with the kind of lifestyle I lived, he said something that made the whole room drop dead silent for a few seconds. He said it wasn't about keeping up, it was about walking side by side, and walking together doesn't mean you have to take the exact same strides, it means you respect each other's pace. My mom went quiet. Then she turned to me and said, in that specific tone she uses when she's making a comment that sounds neutral but absolutely isn't, he sounds exactly like your father. My dad passed away when I was 22. He was a plumber. He loved my mom with a quiet, rock-solid consistency that I grew up witnessing without ever knowing how to label it. I had to look away for a second. 3 months after the test date, Caleb invited me over to see the house he shared with Martha. It was a small townhouse on a quiet street, dark green iron gate, a tiny but pristine front yard featuring a rose bush that Martha clearly babied. I walked in highly aware that I was stepping into a space packed with a lifetime of history. The living room was small, filled with furniture that didn't belong to any particular decade, the kind of room you put together over years based on what works, not what matches. There was a framed photo on the wall of the two of them at the beach. He looked younger, and she had a massive smile. There was a stack of books right next to the couch. Martha was in the kitchen when I walked in. She greeted me with that blunt hospitality of someone who has zero time for formalities. She warned me the place was small and hoped I wouldn't be uncomfortable. I told her I didn't come to measure square footage. She smiled and tossed an apron at me. I helped prep dinner. I chopped veggies, stirred the beans, peeled garlic. Things my grandmother taught me to do that I hadn't done in decades because, in my adult life, I always paid someone else to do it. Caleb kept finding excuses to step into the kitchen, handing me a knife, grabbing a pot, his shoulder lightly brushing against mine in a way that never felt staged. The kitchen was way too small for 3 people, and it was absolutely perfect. We ate at a round table, on plates that didn't match, and it was the most satisfying meal I had eaten in a very long time. Not because of the food itself. Because of the hum of conversation, the warmth of the overhead light, the way Martha told an old story with the joy of someone who knows people are actually listening. After dinner, she pulled me aside while Caleb was at the sink doing the dishes. She sat next to me on the worn-out couch and looked at me with the blunt honesty of a woman who's been through enough crap not to waste her breath. She told me her son was too damn proud to ever admit when he needed something. She said I was going to need patience with him. That he doesn't ask for help, because he thinks needing help means he failed at something. I told her I knew. She looked at me closely and said, "You seem like you're wired the exact same way." I didn't say a word. 2 proud people together can be a beautiful thing, or a total disaster, she kept going, completely without judgment. It all comes down to who's willing to cave first when things get hard. As I was leaving, with Caleb walking me to my car, I asked him if he thought his mom liked me. He laughed and said she only gives advice to people she respects. If she hadn't liked me, she would have just stayed polite and distant the whole night. I got in my car and sat there for a minute before starting the engine. I looked at the townhouse in the rearview mirror, the light glowing in the living room window, the rose bush out front. I thought about everything I had built just to feel safe, the luxury condos, the corporations, the luxury cars, the endless testing, and how none of it had ever given me what that cramped kitchen with mismatched plates gave me tonight. When I got home, I went straight out to the balcony. The city was glowing with its usual hum. I pulled out my phone and texted him, "Thank you for tonight." He texted back fast, "Thank you for actually showing up." I thought a lot about the difference between physically showing up and actually showing up. How I had spent years physically showing up in all the wrong places, investing my emotions into performances, testing people instead of actually feeling anything. And how tonight was the first time in a very long time that I was just purely present, not auditing, not calculating, not guarding myself. My partner Rachel called me the next day, asking if I had given any thought to selling off 2 more locations like I had casually mentioned. I told her I had. That I was moving forward with selling one of them, the one furthest away that demanded way more micromanagement than actual ROI. I didn't need 12 clinics to prove whatever I thought I needed to prove. Maybe I never did. Caleb found out that night, via text. His reply was, "How did it feel?" The exact same question again. It was his way of saying that the decision itself didn't matter, only whether it came from me or from fear. I replied, relieved. He replied, "Then it was the right call." There's one afternoon I hold on to with a care I don't quite know how to explain. It was a Saturday. Caleb had started running this informal workshop, no official name, no real structure, in a room donated by a community center near the hospital. He was teaching teenagers basic electronic and equipment repair, simple skills that could open doors in a job market a lot of them didn't have equal access to. I went to watch without telling him. I got there halfway through the class. I stood by the door, which was cracked open, just watching. He was crouched next to a 16-year-old kid, pointing something out inside a dismantled circuit board, speaking with a patience that never once bordered on condescending. The kid was watching him with the hyperfocus of someone who genuinely wants to learn. This man had gone to a $700 dinner with me while carrying medical debt in his pocket, looked me dead in the eyes, said the words that dismantled a 2-year fortress, and was now standing in a tiny room teaching kids because he believed that doing something meaningful was more important than just making a buck. I walked away without going in. I didn't want to break his flow. I texted him once I was back in my car, saw you from a distance. Left so I wouldn't interrupt. You are a really good man. He took a minute. When he replied, he said, you are too. You just needed some time to believe it. That I was, too. Not just an automatic compliment. An observation from someone who had gotten close enough to actually know. In the months that followed, life rearranged itself in a different way. I sold the other location, just like I planned. I kept the 8 that were running with solid teams and a much clearer purpose. I started showing up to the clinics more, being hands-on, remembering why I started this empire to begin with. The work didn't get smaller. It just got more grounded. With Caleb, we started building something that didn't have a label for a long time, and that was perfectly fine. He knew my dark corners and I knew his. He knew I still had the knee-jerk reactions of a woman trained to be paranoid, that sometimes I'd look at a situation and my internal auditor would kick in before my heart did. And he'd call it out, directly, without any drama, you're running a test again, aren't you? And I learned how to stop. To take a breath. To choose differently. We had one tough conversation about moving in together. He refused to leave his mom behind, and I refused to move into a place that felt like a sterile monument to corporate success. We were at an honest stalemate for weeks. In the end, we landed on something that wasn't perfect on paper but made total sense for us, a simpler apartment, in a quieter neighborhood, close enough to Martha for him to be there the second she needed him. I gave up the crystal chandelier. It wasn't a sacrifice. It felt like dropping dead weight. The night we signed the lease for the new place, we sat out on the porch of Martha's house drinking tea she had brewed. She stared out at the street in silence for a while. Then she said, to no one in particular, my mother used to say a good house is one you don't have to clean up just because company's coming. I knew exactly what she meant. Today, when people ask me what changed about me over the last 2 years, I never really know how to fit it into a single sentence. I can say I sell less and deliver more. That I run companies but I don't let them run me. That I learned the difference between protecting yourself and isolating yourself, and that difference, once you finally see it, changes everything. I can say that a guy with a working-class paycheck showed me that pride isn't about what you hoard, but about who you refuse to stop being. I can say that I, who spent years testing every single man with the crushing weight of my wallet, was the only one who failed my own test. And that deciding to try again, without the luxury watch on the table, without the car keys in plain sight, without the armor I so carefully strapped on every morning, was the bravest thing I have ever done in my life. I don't need highly calibrated systems to detect character anymore. I learned to look people in the eyes and trust what I see, slowly, carefully, but without the terror paralyzing me before I even start. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night with that old, familiar panic, that voice whispering that I'm vulnerable, that I'm exposed, that I need to seize control. In those moments, I take a deep breath, stare up at the ceiling of an apartment that doesn't have a crystal chandelier but has plenty of light, and I remember the words spoken by a man sitting at a ridiculously expensive table, right after paying for a dinner he owed absolutely nothing for. I hope it was worth whatever you were trying to find out. It was. More than anything I've ever bought in my entire life. Now, if you like this story, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments, which part made your jaw drop. Oh, and don't forget to become a member to get access to exclusive videos I don't post here. See you there.